Hey there, family, and hey, welcome to our second edition of it's a talk with our one of my favorite artists. I've known him the longest. I think I've known him for over 30 years now, and he actually was pivotal in me becoming a collector and reaching new, highlights in my collector journey. And that would be none other than my good friend, and my nickname for him is King. He doesn't know that. He's realizing that now. Mr. Purple. Mr. Purple. We're not talking about Prince. My brother, Larry Poncho Brown. Baltimore in the building.
Right,
all right. West Side represent. No, I'm just playing. So we want to welcome you to our space, and I'm glad that we have this opportunity to chat.
Thank you.
Anything you want to say to open us up?
Well, along the way, there are a few people that I said that if you have three pieces, you have a collection.
Yes.
That took that sentence and ran with it, and you were one of them.
Yeah.
So if you're out there and you have three pieces, you have a collection.
A little known fact before we start getting into our questions is that every major step as a part of my journey as a collector, this young man was responsible for that. Poncho has a way, and for those of you all that will see this and know him very well, Poncho has a way in his own unique style of coaching and mentoring when you don't necessarily know you're being coached or mentored. He has an unusual way of dropping nuggets that make you listen. And so he has been my mentor, my coach, and my teacher for these 30 plus years. I think my first original was a Larry Poncho Brown original. And for many of you know that I was able to publish a book on my collection, and this gentleman right here was the genius behind that, because I never would have thought about embarking on a project like that until he told me it's time. In some instances, things that I've done during the course of this journey is because he and I have had a conversation and he said two words: it's time.
It's time.
Matter of fact, maybe I should get a t-shirt and have the t-shirt be purple.
Just give me a quarter every time.
And just say, it's time. Okay. And so I never would have this journey that I'm on and have been on would not have been without him. And I'm so incredibly humbled and blessed. So I don't want to kind of crash out and start crying. So I'm going to stop right there and go into our discussion. We'll also let you guys know that I have about 30 pieces. And here's my disclaimer. Every time I normally get in trouble when I go to a studio. That's when I normally go. He used to have all kinds, he used to have shows, but he used to have other kinds of shows that you weren't expecting that you would see the things that you see. And so I go in saying, folks, have you ever gone into a studio or gallery saying, I'm only going to get one? And I got to watch my budget, so I'm only going to get one casting. And then you go in and like, damn. And I don't even cuss.
And I don't drug people.
Okay. And it's like, I'm saying, okay, that one and that one. And I got to figure some things out. And then I'm going online, looking at my account and seeing what I can handle.
But you are my primary demographic. People that are interested, that have a particular financial background, that wouldn't normally be associated with a collector. Everybody expects collectors to be wealthy and a whole bunch of other stereotypes.
Yep.
But my primary demographic is working folks that have disposable income, and they start with what they can afford. And then when you start from what you afford, it just blossoms depending on how much you invest in.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that when I met you, I wasn't even working. When I met you, I was in grad school, right? And
a lot of my collectors come straight out of college.
Yeah, so it was an interesting dynamic. How you introduced me to art shows like the Heritage. There was one in Baltimore.
Yeah, the Black Heritage Fine Art Show.
The Black Heritage Fine Art Show.
The
October
Gallery Show.
Yes, every year.
Yes. Art Expo.
Wait a minute. Art on the Riverfront in Delaware.
Riverfront.
Yeah.
Right.
So I no shade, no shade family. I was like the low key groupie. Even though I really wasn't a groupie, because I was going to see a lot of the artists that I had met when they were in town, and so I wasn't really a groupie, but it was becoming that at least once a month I was on the road.
Well, you already defined history because most people that collect never had a chance to align themselves with the artists, and so when this market started in the early '80s, mid '80s. It was the first time people had ready access to these artists. You could meet them, you could greet. Some of them became rock stars just by the nature of being able to be seen. And so that also added an element to collecting where people could come, they can meet and greet the artists and kind of go with them on their journey.
So that kind of morphs into the golden age of African American art.
Absolutely.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, the golden age of African American art really represents a period between 1985 and 2005. We talk about shows like two different eras, the Good Times era and the Cosby era. And the Good Times era was significant because it was, if you could imagine a guy like me seeing a teenager at home painting as a pivotal character on TV, that changed everything for a lot of people to even see an artist in that capacity. Even if he was the silliest one on the show, it was still pivotal. I mean, as a child, I often wondered, suppose Michael was the artist, suppose Thelma was the artist, suppose the mother was the artist, suppose the father was the artist, what would be the dynamic shift? But the fact that it was JJ really sent home to me at a time that it was an awakening. But what also happened during that period of time is that was the first time we saw Ernie Barnes' work represented in mass media. He became a rock star overnight by his work showing on that program. And so that pretty much launched this golden age of African American art. But the difference between that period is the works were readily accessible and color printing hadn't evolved to a point where everybody could participate. Very, very pivotal. And so while that show was going on, people saw the work, they couldn't go to the mall, they couldn't see it, they couldn't find it. You flip next, and Norman Lear was responsible for launching this vision. He also launched the Jeffersons. And what's so significant about the Jeffersons was, even though he was supposed to be upwardly mobile and had an apartment in the sky and the whole nine, very little art was depicted on the show, and certainly not art by African-American artists. I feel like it was probably the largest lost opportunity ever with the Jeffersons. But then you fast forward a couple more years and you start talking about The Cosby Show, which changed everything. You know, Brenda Joy Smith, Ellis Wilson, Varney Honeywood, you had all of these artists' works depicted with this family that was living their best life. The difference between that and the Cosby era is that the printing industry had gone through a major revolution. So now all of a sudden you could reproduce color work. That itself launched what we know as the golden age of African American art, because many artists began to do affordable art and they would go into communities to sell this art. And because the thirst for blackness was so huge back then, before that period, you saw the blaxploitation films. You know, we were cheering on the hoes and the gangsters. We didn't care. We were so starved to see ourselves represented. And then if you can also flip to when the Black Light poster came along, that was around the same period. So we saw these provocative pieces, using of zodiac signs, and people we normally knew, and these bright colors, and you went and got a purple bulb so you could activate the poster. But those pieces were not created by African American artists. That was pieces that were put into our community, and because we were starved for identity, we just jumped in on with both feet. And so all of these things, if you merge them together, was a catalyst to the biggest art revolution since the Harlem Renaissance. The difference between that is that that period went so fast that many people never documented it.
What's interesting is that it also introduced the idea of the artist and also the collector. I know that, people say a lot of things about Bill Cosby, but Bill Cosby was an avid art collector. And the one thing that my favorite Cosby, and we are totally going off script, casting. Our two favorite Cosby episodes.
That's right.
One when Vanessa went to Baltimore to see The Wretched and
That's
had
right.
big fun. And Claire, you saw Black motherhood in Claire because she wore Vanessa out. Okay? But my other one, that was my number two. My first one was Cliff at the auction house.
At the auction house, that's right. And that was the first time we had ever seen anything like that represented before.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then you know what, the interesting thing, and I'm going to tell on myself, and I hope people that I used to work with don't see this clip, is that Cliff introduced the idea too that you didn't have to be there to participate. And that was really how I was able to acquire a piece, because I was working the day that Swan had an auction, African American art auction, and I was interested in a couple of pieces, Castan, and I had meetings all day. And at that time, it wasn't as savvy to go online and participate online.
Yeah, that's a new thing.
And so I called Swan, and they said, you can phone in the bed. Mm-hmm. And that thing got me, because I was like, all right, Heathcliff, I see some Cosby in that lesson, and ended up actually getting the piece because they called me when the lot was up, mm-hmm. right? And was able to participate and get the piece. And I ain't even going to tell y'all what piece it is, but it's in this room. And so so there are some things here that I think are interesting to me. As a collector, one of the things that got me about that age, right, about that season, is that I started looking at the sets of shows.
Everybody
for the work, right?
Exactly.
So even Empire, mm-hmm. right? Started looking at the sets. The last one, Eddie Murphy had the Coming to America too, mm-hmm. right?
There were so many shows that came out around that time.
Sets, yeah.
You had Living Single. You had A Different World. Mm-hmm. You had Will Smith's show, Fresh mm-hmm. Prince. Mm-hmm. So all these shows began to spin off, and artist works began to show up on these shows. And so I was fortunate enough to have 3 pieces on A Different World for 4 seasons. Mm-hmm. And so Black is Black, parts of my Queen series, were really seen worldwide through that show, and really became kind of, there's this whole HBCU environment mm-hmm. that really leaned into my work around that period of time. So work showing on shows was a very, very popular catalyst to this movement. That was another part of it, because, when you looked at the Cosby Show, and again at Good Times era, that was the catalyst. When you fuse art with media, and specifically television media, and you don't know how many millions of people are going to see those things, it really changes everything.
So your career has been long and thriving, right? I like I said, we met over 30 years ago, and mm-hmm. you were very much in it. And folks, when I say in it, my first time at October Gallery, and there's going to be some stories here and there, because like I said, we've had a long journey together. Mm-hmm. And I was overwhelmed. So you had John Holyfield in one area. You were in another area. Kenneth was in another area.
Yeah, if you were,
y'all were all around each other. Yeah. And then there was Charles Bibbs, who was at that year, I think, mm-hmm. You were here and down that row, right? Mm-hmm. And then he was like right close to you.
Well,
and both of you had, Holyfield had lines too, but everybody had lines. Like lines.
People really wouldn't understand the influx of interest from that period of time. Just like we line up for concerts or things now, that was what was happening in that period of time. Because again, when you have that kind of a longing for identity and you have this affordable art thing and they collide together and people are able to participate on any level they want to, that was the pivotal change. I mean, you had artists that were putting out an open edition reproduction for $25 on up to a limited edition that might be $200. And so that left room for everybody and everyone. And during that period of time, because offset lithography was kind of that thing that the revolution in printing had produced, there was a lot of primarily offset lithograph pieces being marketed around that time. Yes, there were serography, there still were etching and other things that preceded that period of time, but for the most part with the affordable art movement, that was where people started. So you started off buying that poster you liked. And then that morphed into you when you heard about that limited edition. And so the next thing you would buy this limited edition. And then between that and artists becoming very, very popular, like Charles Bibbs really put us on the map as far as editions and pressing edition sizes, where we were used to seeing edition sizes of 600, 850. Charles was coming out with editions that were 2,000. It was just a confusing but a powerful time to try to jump on board to participate in this thing. And really a lot of the results of what we see happening in the African American art market right now are directly attributed to the attention that was garnered during that period
That was
of time.
going to be my question. How, if it has, from you having longevity in your career and pretty much being an artist full time, which a lot of artists didn't take that particular road, okay? Has your kind of, for the length of time you've been in it, has your your process shifted in any way?
I can't say that my process has shifted, but with the advent of social networking and other things, now artists are responsible for more than one aspect of just being an artist. Before you could focus on just being an artist. Now you have to be a small media company. You have to do video, you have to do photography, you have to do writing, you have to do a little bit of everything now. So, of course, that affects the movement itself. But my practice is pretty much the same. I go into my studio in my quiet space and I create things, and I kind of put myself in a mindless state of creating. Artists sometimes tell you this narrative of how they get prepared. No, for me it's very simple. All I need is a room that's quiet with some music, and I just let things flow through me. I look at myself as a vessel, and I just get out the way. And so when you do that, everything that I'm thinking, feeling politically and otherwise comes out through the work, regardless. Whether I sit down and say, I want to do a piece that deals with the marginalization of the African-American male. That's a powerful statement, but it comes through my work anyway, because that's the stuff that I see. And so every artist works different. For me, this is my 49th year as a professional artist. When I was coming through, artists had to choose whether they were going to do art or something else. And so that was a struggle for most artists. So you saw some artists that did it part-time, but the majority of artists actually reached points in their career where they had to decide whether they were going to quit their jobs. I mean, Leroy Campbell had to quit his job. Charles Bibbs left a six-figure job because his artwork began to outsell his six-figure job. And so that was the catalyst for most of us. How can we become independent enough to break away from having to be employed and be full-time? And so that doesn't even exist now. We have this new mutant group of artists who now can work from home, who have good jobs, who are now able to create at the same level we were creating, but have a full-time job, a full artist career. And now with social networking, they're able to accomplish more now than we could accomplish back in that period of time. And so each thing is different. But the catalyst is, I was running with the best of the best. I would go to a show one week and then we would see what was happening. The next week I would come and you would see a whole different batch of work, and you had to go back to your studio and question, what am I doing? Nowadays, artists are moving in herds of 30 and 40, where they get invitations to shows that are in the same region. They see each other all the time. But the danger in that is now everybody's work is being influenced by everybody else's in a way that wasn't happening when I was coming through. When I was coming through, you were with the best of the best, and most of my peers were 10 to 15 years older than me. But they embraced me. They never marginalized me, never made me feel, except for two. I'll give names. Gilbert Young, you know what's up. Frank Frazier, you know what's up. Those are some of the impediments I ran into. They are my best friends now. But when I was starting, there were a few folks that tried to do the tough love thing. But for the most part, my very first show was with Brenda Joy Smith. And they were all embracing. They all gave me information. It was just a wonderful time to meet artists of that caliber. And I think with me running with that caliber of talent, it kind of put me on a trajectory that I would not have been on if I had not followed that path.
So let's talk a little bit about your agility. And you're one of the people that I know that if you see an obstacle, you can figure a way and develop a strategy to kind of stick and move, right? To the answer to whatever the challenge is. And I want to speak specifically to COVID. Now, we've talked about us being the normal grind or the normal way of doing things in the art space for the artist and the collector is that you're on the road at least once or twice a month, if not more than that. Going to different fairs and shows
in different cities all over the country.
And different cities all over the country. So when I started, and a lot of times I would see Poncho there. If we were in New York, if we were in Philly, in Virginia, right? I would see him at pretty much every show that in Baltimore, right? I would see him at every show. And so then COVID came and shows weren't happening like that. And I remember at one point you reaching out and saying that you were going to start having like virtual, I'm referring to them as virtual shows online. And can you talk about that?
Well, long before COVID, there was the economic downfall in the early 2000s, when the housing market, the financial markets, and everything crashed. That was the seismic shift that affected the art business at large. So I went from servicing 3,000 galleries through my distribution company down to less than 100 within a couple of years. That's how devastating it was. And so artists automatically had to decide what they were going to do, and most dealers and gallerists had to decide what they were going to do. I already knew who was there long term, because folks eventually went off and did something else, but the artists really buckled down and had to figure out, not just me, how to navigate through that terrain, because it was really the first time we had ever seen anything like that before. So by the time COVID came, we were quite prepared. Not only did the venues changed. Not only did the galleries close and the outlets close, but a lot of the shows began to decline.
Yeah.
And so that was really at the core of how we made our money. And so, and most of us, before that crash, the economic crash, most of us were torn with the idea of going into the internet and embracing the internet. And many of us were fighting against the internet. I happen to be one of the ones that was like, look, I see it coming. So when you said about obstacles, I'm always looking ahead of time at what's getting ready to happen and deciding to make that adjustment. I think my age difference allowed me to make that fearlessly. But I was always able to try to pivot. And so pivoting became survival for me. I am not I am a graphic designer by trade who decided he wanted a fine art career. Those sentences do not go together. And when making that decision, I've had to sacrifice a lot of things because of that decision. Even when I went to school, they really should have been like that scene in The Matrix where they pull out a red pill and blue pill. You know, do you do general fine art? Do you do commercial art? When you do general fine art, this is what's available to you. If you do this one, this is what's available to you. And both programs cost the same, but the one I chose was the pill that made me have to prove that I was an artist, whereas the other one would not have. That pill that I chose is not part of the fine art establishment. And so the movement I'm talking about, the Golden Age of African American art, wasn't a fine art movement. It was a commercial movement. And so, yes, there was a fine art movement going at that time because Elizabeth Catlett and Jacob Lawrence and these guys were alive and they were just beginning to be recognized. But they began to be recognized because of this same movement. And so, although people now have chosen and picked sides of where they want to be, I already know that that's really where overall interest in African American art, because in the commercial marketplace, there wasn't even a term for African American art in the commercial realm when I started. They called it ethnic at that point. There was Southwest, there was Asian, there was XYZ, but they hadn't got to calling it Black art, and certainly not African American art at that period of time. And so it's just so many things happen that you can't put into one sentence. But depending on where you came along, if you were one of those customers that walked into the mall and bought one of these posters and you followed me up to this date, most of those people either have a collection, some of them are still hobbyists, some of those people still brag about the work they purchased from me, so that still keeps me alive and relevant. Do I aspire to be recognized on the fine art side of the business? Oh yeah, I think every artist likes to, but I think you got to really understand what your background is, and you have to follow the path that's available to you. It's not available to all of us. And most artists that are successful on the commercial side of the business really don't understand how to navigate out of that space. And I've seen some artists that are very, very successful at navigating that kind of change. And then now we're living in a time where museums are beginning to recognize living artists. That is another major revolution because they never would have put millions of dollars behind an Amy Sherwood or a Kehinde Wiley or a Bisa Butler. I can go down a list of our masters that didn't get that opportunity. And so now it's just all these things are kind of prerequisites to the others.
You know, so you talked about this is just like oh, by the way, not only getting that kind of presence in the museums, but for them to also be featured like on a regular basis at a Phillips or at a Sotheby's, right?
Well, that's
or
new.
as a Christie's that Amy Sherwood and Bisa Butler and Carrie James Marshall.
Go down the list
and
of
Andy
artists.
Wiley are actually, their work on average of 2, 3, maybe 4 times a year is featured in those kinds of markets is definitely amazing. That Amy Sherwood would say no to the Smithsonian, and yet and still after that there were other museums and say come to us, right? And so it's amazing to see the evolution of it all. But I wanted to also talk to you about this. But were you getting ready to say something before I talk to you?
I think that the auction house aspect is just as new as some of the other things we talked about. The auction house is an interesting space because somehow people feel like you're validated if you're within that space. And as an artist, and I think it does, people really don't understand how that structure works. All artists think they can do it and can't. I've gone to see estates of other famous people that were trying to sell their works. Maya Angelou, I went up to New York to see that. I wanted to physically see it, to see what works were there, what was represented, how many contemporaries had gotten in. I got to see some Charlie Palmer pieces in there, some John Biggers pieces in there. But it was also interesting to look to the side and see some Romare Bearden pieces. Why is a Romare Bearden piece still selling for less than $10,000? So when you start looking at the auction house, yes, it does mean, yes, we've arrived, but it also makes you have to question the validity of the masters that we do have. So when you look at the Elizabeth Catletts, the Jacob Lawrences, their works still today don't garner the value that they should be for their counterparts. When you hear that the piece from Good Times sold for 17 million or 14 million, and I don't care how many million they put on it, for me it's not sufficient for what that piece represented. It also doesn't do it for the artists of that caliber of that at that time. So it's a marker of acceptance, just like we've gone through certain things with civil rights movement, and certain things haven't changed, but certain things have. I look at the auction house as being another one of those circumstances. Yes, it's to be looked at, but it's also to be evaluated at some point. I've never been satisfied with the pricing of our modern masters or our masters' works compared to their counterparts. And so I think that that's an important move now, because now everybody, like you said, we've been on each other 30 years. So everybody was collecting work when we met, have retired, died, their work is flipping to their children now. And so now we're meeting a bunch of people now that are at a point where they have to assess their collection for insurance purposes and for their whatever other legalities they're trying to do with their homes and their legacies. And so it's just an interesting time right now. I mean, artists often ask me about the longevity piece, and I think that the one thing artists have automatically is longevity. This is not something we retire from. It's something you do, and you keep, as long as you stay relevant and visible, you're still around and viable. Some people curve off, some people's interests curve off. I could be popular one year, not popular the next. But my whole goal at this stage in my career is to stay relevant and to take advantage of that 15-year difference that I had starting on the tail end.
Yeah. So the one thing that you mentioned something that I just a couple of minutes on that, and then I want to shift into books.
Okay.
And that one thing that I've kind of, and you and I have talked about this on some level, but in being in a room with different types of individuals in the art space, from collectors to dealers to those who manage collections to the artists themselves, is the whole concept of exposure. And if you want your work to be in a certain tier, it's almost like certain people have to share it with other people. And it's, to me, it's somewhat like I don't want to say this word, but it's just the word that comes to mind is, especially in New York, like the gatekeeper kind of thing, where certain people, if certain people are not speaking the name of, then it's something else as far as value is concerned. I mean, I remember even when Kerry James Marshall, one of Kerry James Marshall works went into the auction space, and Sean Combs got it for, I think, about $21 million or so dollars. And in hearing about how that came to be. So I one thing that I would offer to anyone who is listening, artist, collector, or otherwise, is there's a whole nother discussion that happens in the business of art.
Absolutely.
And not just necessarily the business of artists having to manage their business, right? There's also a collector side of that business, and there's a dealer side of that business.
Exactly.
And there are, for those artists that have managers, air quote, loosely handlers, air quote, there's a whole other side of the business. And so some things don't just happen.
And it's not for every artist.
Yes.
You know, I think the biggest thing I see is that there's a confusion about tracks. And the thing I mentioned earlier about fine art track versus commercial is a very, very important one. I think at some point you use a word that was very, very important, and it's gatekeepers. The art business is a series of gatekeepers. In this business, you don't have to be accredited to do anything. You just need money, and you just have to have power and influence to become very, very powerful as a collective. There's a lot of politics that goes with art too. And so artists were not supposed to lead their careers. It was not worked that way.
Creatives.
From the beginning, artists are right-brained thinking people, and dealers, curators, everybody else you named on your list are left-brained thinkers. Now, does that mean the artists can't be left-brained thinkers? No, it doesn't mean that. But the two go together hand in hand. And for the longest time, artists were always the lowest end of the totem pole. And so the gatekeeping gave them more power. And that still plays out even today. And when you start talking about artists like Amy Sherrill and Kennedy Wiley, it's just like black actors in Hollywood. Everybody doesn't get through. It's not for everybody. Everybody's not going to make that pinnacle. You know, we just need to realize that I'm proud whenever I see anybody achieve anything in art, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on. I visit just as many. I mean, I can't tell you. My favorite artist is Charles White. And I literally jumped on a bus to go to New York City to see his retrospective exhibition. Imagine me going to Maryland Institute College of Art, graduated from there in 1980, and never even hearing a person like Charles White's name. Imagine me learning more about African-American artists 5 years after I graduated from one of the top five black institutions in the United States. See, we're miseducated in our historical perspective on everything, but imagine it, how it feels even in the arts. So by the time I found out about a Charles White, I went crazy. And when I went to his exhibition in New York City, I think it was the first time I actually cried at an exhibition. To see the power of his work, to see it displayed the way that I wish he could have saw it being displayed, to see the people that were there that were absorbing this man's work. Very, very powerful moment for me. And I think at that point, whatever reservations I had about how I felt about the division between fine and commercial, it kind of left. Because to see artists reach that pinnacle opens the door for a lot of other artists, regardless of what track you're on. So there is more behind the scenes in this business thing than what we see as a consumer. What I think is the enemy of the art business, particularly the African-American art business, is elitism. Because typically the gatekeepers come with this aesthetic that always looks down on another level. It's like you have to have a level to look down on to protect how yours is elevated. And so what happens is that people who were dealing with posters, now I don't want to deal with posters. I don't want to deal with originals. People do, I don't want to deal with that. I want to deal with this. People who are buying contemporary. I don't want to deal with contemporary. I want to deal with fine. I don't want to deal with. You see all these levels of elitism that directly affect the decisions of everybody by the murmur that's created with that elitism. And so we all started on this commercial track in buying what we liked. And then most of us got to a point where we got serious about what we were doing. And then we were fortunate enough to have some information out there of how to pursue getting into the arts. And this time we're in right now with AI and information, there's just so many things available to us now to understand where we fit than in any other time in history. There's more professional artists now than any other time in history based on the internet, social networking, and just sheer interest. And so this is just an exciting time for any artist, despite what's happening historically with erasure and a bunch of other things we see. There's a lot of confusion right now with regard to the arts and whether to participate because we're just inundated with information and distractionary information. I say that the worst thing can happen is that we become desensitized to art, just like we get desensitized to seeing violence happening on our stream. It's happening in art right now too. We need to re-engage. We need to understand if your child is home drawing and you don't have any kind of attachment to what's happening right there, then we have a problem. If we watched schools get art programs removed in the 1980s, and we're actually living through a time now where we see that first generation of people that did not have art engagement. And we're seeing all kinds of deficits in schools with aptitude of students and a bunch of other things because of it. The other side we see is that now we have a new understanding of this thing called, it's like this spectrum. We speak about the spectrum now and how broad it is and how many people are affected by it. And now we're beginning to find out that that word affects probably each one of us in a particular way. And so the arts has been pivotal in holding even that part together, because most people that are in the spectrum or on the spectrum or in that space, art is a therapeutic release for them, just like it is for me as an artist. I am definitely on the spectrum. I have an OCD thing and I have an ADD thing. No, I was never diagnosed, but I know it in my day-to-day as I meet people. The other thing we don't talk about is depression, and how creativity and depression are polar opposites to one another. And so if you do and are a creative person, then you need to understand what that opposite space is, because most of your energy, your thoughts, your subject matter is going to come from that pain, that strife, and that struggle. But then right behind that shadow is depression. And so most artists are actually just working to ward off depression. And in that space, we see some of the most exciting things we've ever seen. I think we need to go through a stage of demystification of art to get away from the elitism of art. The elitism of art is going to become very, very destructive energy over time. We need to break down and start getting people back to buying what they like, making sure their walls aren't bare. When I was coming through in the 80s, you would ask a person, do they have any artwork on the wall? Out of 15 people, only 2 people would say they had artwork on the wall. By the time the movement really exploded, you would ask that same question, and out of 12 people, you would have 10 people that had artwork on the wall and 2 didn't. Now we're resorting back to people that you ask that same question, out of 12, 2 people. 2 people have work on their walls. How does that happen? It's all of the things that's been happening in the realm of creativity and art. And so while we're talking about the wonderful things that's happening in these auction houses and the value in artists being able to get more exposure, we're talking about some other things that need to be discussed.
Okay. So let's shift a little bit. I mentioned before how you were pivotal, you were the it in me publishing my first book on art, or my collection specifically. I had thoughts about it, but I never really seriously went into that direction until you and I had a conversation and you said, "What? It's time." Now, the interesting thing about that, and I want to shift this a little bit into art books, because during my journey, I am one of those individuals that look at things from all sides of the equation, right? And so one of the things that I was realizing is that there were all these books about Georgia O'Keeffe and Picasso and Michelangelo and all of these different artists, Andy Warhol, all of these different artists, that there were books out there.
And on the commercial track, you have Frank Frazetta, Boris Vallejo. You had a whole bunch of other artists from the commercial side that also had
books out there. Some of them were plate books. Some of them were books about their life's journey. Right. Some of them were more catalog oriented than books. And so, and some of them were actually like portfolios. Shout out to Limited Edition Club, right? And so in that also shifted a little bit for me. Because I wasn't seeing as many African American artists, aside from the Romare Beardens, aside from I would say Jacob Lawrence, and I say those in particularly those 2 because in also collecting art books, right? You would think that there would be a number of books out there about or by or published about certain artists' work. And those were the two artists that I saw a number of books and catalogs and even plate books, if you will, about their work, right? The interesting thing, and you and I kind of talk about this, is I have seen a shifting, if you will, from us publishing more about our artistry. Collectors have published, and also the artists have published. And I've also, and you might not like this word, have seen the value in it, right? So the value in it from the perspective of adding it to the resume, quote unquote, if you will, of the artist, but also the value of the books themselves. It's interesting, and I use an example, Michael Rosenfeld, shout out to Michael Rosenfeld Gallery, is that they've even have a publishing arm in their gallery. And you can't, as soon as a book comes out specifically about an African American artist's work, it's gone. Right? And I remember they published the work on...
traditionally, books were really driven by academia. You know, even when you start thinking about, people like Romare Beard and some of the other artists, they came from HBCU backgrounds or affiliated with HBCU backgrounds. A lot of those people were the ones that were find grants and were in a space to be able to create books on these people. But just like we talked about things changing over time, institutions no longer have the same leverage on the arts as they used to. It used to be governed by them, and it's no longer governed by them. It's governed by the art business itself now. It used to be a mixture of the two. I never forget when I first started working with you, I already saw you and another person that we worked with at the time named Paul Braswell in y'all passion level. And I was like, well, these two collectors I think could be people that could write a book on their collections. And so I started telling you early on, hey, shoot your stuff, shoot it, buy it, shoot it, document it, and then we'll just hold on to it. We'll have a conversation later. And so most of you did. I know you had a big challenge with pieces with glass, so you had to go back and rephotograph. But that was that thing that I've always seen ahead of time. And so now it's at a point where if Larry Poncho Brown expected anybody to write about him, who would it be? And then if we rewind it, artists were making high 6 and 7 figures and weren't printing books. Why doesn't Paul Goodnight have a book? Why doesn't Charles Bibbs have a book? I've often wondered this, but because I was 15 to 20 years younger than them, I didn't think I was ready for it yet until one day I heard somebody say how many years I've been working. And so it's changing.
It is.
And then because of technology again, that's another thing that happens. And so I know a lot of folks that have published books, and then the gatekeeper thing starts happening, and well, whose books are more valuable than the other people's books? You're going to get that in every aspect of the arts. But one thing that's very, very clear is that we're not documenting enough of what we do. Whether it be through books, whether it be through documentaries. I'm loving this period we're in right now. I'm watching documentaries come together where people are just telling their stories. As far as books are concerned, it's an open marketplace right now. And now before you had to have a publisher, the publisher had to see you worthy of even publishing you. An institution had to see you worthy of even doing a book of. Now, if you have any wherewithal, and the one thing artists have now they never had before because of this division, artists never had the connection to the collectors when they were coming through the traditional realm of being represented. You were not even seeing the shows most of the time. They did an opening, you did an appearance, and you go home, you were not in the public. Now it's just the reverse. And now with social networking, everybody has a following now. So imagine if I publish a book by an artist that's been doing this for 40 years, and she has no distribution, and she ran 1,000 books, and then a year and a half later, 2 years later, she's having to run her book again off of just her connection of her books. Shout out to Karen Y. Buster. it's a different time. And so this whole conversation of who has the power or the leverage or the whatever, will the art industry look at her book and frown upon it? Probably will. When they see the quality of her book, they can say what they want to say. But at some point, you got to ask yourself, well, who's doing what for whom? And that was why initially when I talked to you as a collector, that I saw a book as being part of your future, because I was not wrong in my projection of what was going to happen for Sheila Wright, nor anybody else. And I'm pleased right now at this point, having published 3 books, to be working on Paul Goodnight's book.
Wow.
And so I've worked, and it's not for everybody. I've worked for some local folks. I've worked with for Overdue Recognition and some other people. And some of these people are ready. Some of these people are not ready. It's a very, how long did yours take?
Over a year.
Over a year, and it was more like 2 years to pull things together. Not that it was a full-time thing, but one of the ways we do this is that we go through a process, and we also working at the pace of the person and their life and all the other things they got to deal with.
Well, if you recall, when we were working on mine, we had another thought process for how that thing was going to happen.
Exactly.
And then when that didn't happen, you said, okay, you're going to have to go pivot. You had to pivot. You had to pivot.
That's right.
And I will say this, though. I learned so much through that experience. I am working on my second book. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I learned so much through that process. And even now, some of what I learned through that process has even come up in my current class for the appraising, right? Because it's also this thing about the law of it, Keston. We sitting up here thinking that we own the artwork. Yeah, you own the artwork, but you don't have the intellectual rights to it.
Exactly.
And so you have the right to do a number of things with the artwork that you own, but one thing that you can't do is reproduce it.
Right.
Right? And so I remember, we could move on, but I remember and having to go through this, that took a lot of time. That
took most of the time.
That took a lot of time because a number of the artists were no longer on the planet.
Exactly.
And so you had to find out who had the rights to approve the reproduction of the image. And Oh my God.
Of the people that approached you.
We ain't gonna talk about them people.
Who are you? Not. You're lucky I ain't throwing your name out there. Calling and asking her, did she get permission to run the Elizabeth Catlett's book up?
No,
I mean, the elitism is so vast that it just makes you it just makes you silent. But my bigger point to all of this is we have the wherewithal to put whatever information we want to put out there, regardless of who's governing it. And I think I want to say that publicly, that if it's time for all of us to get our stories out. And the arts is kind of almost, come on, what other space should be normalized to see in books than art?
Yeah.
And so don't be fooled by the auction houses and who's doing this and who's doing that. Just, are you ready? Who would you highlight? Why? Because we all have stories. And whether you're on your fine art trajectory or the commercial trajectory, doesn't matter. My work is in 500,000 homes. I don't know too many artists that achieved that the way that I was able to do it and other artists were able to do it. Is that frowned upon by the art industry? Absolutely. Because they didn't want you taking control of they didn't want you publishing your own work. They didn't want you dealing directly with wholesalers and distributors. I had to pivot and do all of that. I had to fool people into believing I was just a worker for my distribution company before they realized it was me. It has its pluses and its negatives, but I have chosen what my trajectory is going to be. And I've not had many people get in the way of my dreams and aspirations. And I'm often excited about the things that are beginning to happen in the arts, because one advancement for one is an advancement for everyone.
Yeah, I never the humility of it all, and by that I mean, I remember one time you and I were having a conversation and said, okay, where are we? where are we? Where are we? And it's, I gotta get this, I gotta get, because if I didn't get the sign off, if I didn't get the permission, then I have to think about who else, take that out of the prospectus that we had.
Well, to break it down for you, she had a choice of using one of my works, which she could have done readily, or using Elizabeth Catlett's work. And in that case, I said, it's best for you to use Elizabeth Catlett's work if you can get clearance on it than my work. I would be flattered that you did it, but I would rather you go this route. And so my thing is that at some point you got to park yourself, know what you're doing. I can't say I don't have ego, because without an ego, I wouldn't have been as successful as I am. But I understand humility and what it means. I've also taken pride in mentorship. If you listen to most of the videos of artists talking about their work, they mention me somewhere, because I actively take time to demystify the art business for artists. It's something that I dedicated my life to.
You've answered the question on mentorship and coaching. But, so the thing about the Elizabeth Catlett piece is that, I quintessentially love her work. And I remember
when you got your first Elizabeth Catlett.
Yes.
So it was a no-brainer.
I was E&S Gallery at the Puck Building at the National Black Fine Arts Show.
That was another big show that we didn't mention.
And we listen, come on now. So this week we're gonna have to do a part 1, part 2, Custon. Because listen. I'm gonna tell y'all folks, and this is really crazy about the next artist that we prayerfully interview should be somebody that I'm not friends with, know so well, and part of my family. But I remember the Jacob Javits Center, and I drove up there, Cass. It's my first time going to the International Art Expo. And on the same row, these jokers was wearing me out. So it was Poncho, Paul Goodnight, Charles Bibbs. I want to say Ted was there. And
back then, Joe Holston was there too.
Joe Holston was there, and I think what's his name? Last name Cole. Is it Keith Cole? Or I think he's out of Atlanta. But and I'm sitting up there, and we ended up getting a couple of pieces of a portfolio of Paul Goodnight's. Right.
I bought one too.
And you bought one. I bought one. Or did you buy two?
I bought two.
And I bought one. And so and just to be in that dynamic of artists, this is what I love to see, because sometimes some artists can be in their own little head about, other artists, right? I like to see the camaraderie and the brotherhood, sisterhood of artists together. To me, it's nothing like it. Some people get in their own space, just like some gallerists get in their own space. But just to see that we're all together in this, everybody has their gift, everybody has their talent. Everyone has their ability, but there's no shade on somebody else that has a different thing. I don't think.
See, artists don't really do that. I think. No. I'm gonna disagree with you, because I know more artists than you do. I know that the ego comes with this business.
That part.
The ego comes with this business, but most artists don't lead with theirs. They don't. I have met more artists that work together with each other. The camaraderie with artists has always been strong. I preach on that. When I had my studio fire in 1995, that could have been the loneliest period in my life. I lost my whole studio. You're talking about $1.5 million of stuff gone overnight. The very first people to connect with me was my artist family. I mentioned early on how Frank Frazier got on my nerves. Frank Frazier sent me a coffin-sized case full of art supplies.
Wow.
Michael Brown, and we never talked to each other, the ego thing. Michael Brown found my house, banged on my door like the police, came into my living room, sat with me, cried with me, and gave me $500. No words exchanged. Elba Vargas, one of the biggest dealers on the East Coast, came to my house. No pretentiousness, no agenda, to check to make sure I was good. Paul Goodnight sent me his whole mailing list. Back then, the mailing list was everything. He also sent me a check for $5,000. My big brother, Charles Bibbs, same thing. Mailing list. You imagine Charles Bibbs sending you his mailing list? So, Annie Lee, I can go down the list. So, this whole short-term conversation about artists, I don't even want to hear it. Because I know when it comes down to it, we are that dysfunctional cousin family. We might not like each other at the moment. We fuss, we cuss, but let something happen. And they always show up. And even when the noise is created by not just artists, you got artists who have to coexist in this space. You got dealers who decide they don't want to deal with certain artists. You got gallerists that decide they don't want to deal with certain artists. You got curators. So the gatekeeping thing, they play with artists to create division. We see, and when we talk about the art business, we're talking about real life.
The interesting thing with me, I actually, in a matter of less than 20, we were on a deadline at this point because you were saying, you guys shipped it out, and I was like, ah. So what was amazing to me is that I was able to reach within 24 hours. James Denmark and his wife, Cal Massey and his wife, and Richard Mayhew and his wife, and it's one other person because I talked to 4 of the older generation of artists, and to hear them talk about one, be so cordial, so nice, so supportive. And I remember Richard Mayhew, God rest his soul, saying, "Thank you, thank you for buying." And that thing, I was.
See, artists,
oh my God.
See, but artists recognize who's representing them and who's not. And artists themselves have gone through another whole journey of being recognized or not recognized, or documented or not documented based on their careers. Mm-hmm. And so, most of them are going to be very humble when they get an opportunity because they don't see many people actively striving to do that. Yeah. This is a different world now.
It is. And so it's one of those things that my journey as a collector has been absolutely rich. There have been some highs and lows. I remember meeting Elizabeth Catlett's son, and it's been some highs and lows of the whole thing, but all in all, it's been a wonderful ride thus far.
See, early on, we were showing and doing the early stages in the early 80s of doing the shows. Usually when we do the shows, there was always a featured artist, and it would be a featured master. And so I got to meet Elizabeth Catlett. I got to meet Jacob Lawrence. And so that was a time when we got to see a crossover of a lot of our legends during that period of time because they would be the people anchoring some of the shows we would do. And so, here it is. 35 years later, it's a whole different ballgame. Many of them are no longer with us. But all I can say to artists is keep striving. The whole business has changed. If you are a collector, wake up. If you are not participating in this movement, it's time to get involved. Ask yourself, what are you going to do if your child is doing it? Because that's another area we have not discussed. It is also a problem. When I go to art schools all over the country, I'm not seeing the representation that I used to see. And that's mostly because parents are doing something specific with regards to the arts and how they view it.
So closing out the topic about the art books is one thing that I've noticed is from a valuation perspective, and valuation is always, right now in this season of my life, a part of my conversation, one, because I'm working to get my appraisal credentials. But the one thing, or I should say, the one thing that I think is very interesting is the law of supply and demand when it comes to art books.
Exactly.
And how when the demand is high, and as people purchase and acquire, the lower, right, the supply is, the value of that book, or the price of that book increases.
Yeah.
And I've seen that time and time again.
Oh, yeah.
And so to me,
because most books are typically run with one edition.
Right.
Rare do you see books go into second and third editions, and if they do, you'll see larger institutions and museums that can afford to do that.
That is true.
Doing that.
That is true.
Academically, they would get a grant, and they probably wouldn't get that grant the following year, so you wouldn't didn't see reprints.
So the one thing that I will say is some people may not know this. Rest in peace, Samela Lewis was pivotal, right? Because she was the one, I think, that started the Hampton University journals on African American art.
Exactly.
But also even some of the what she published, Richmond Barthé and Elizabeth Catlett, that now those books are out of print, and if you wanted them, it was going to cost you about $500, but it was nowhere near that when they first were printed.
Exactly.
But there's some other Elizabeth Catlett. There's one other Elizabeth Catlett book.
I mean, exhibition catalogs, all those things soon are going to become
Well, let's talk
very
about
valuable.
this. The most recent one of the Institute of Chicago Institute of Art, was publishing the retrospective on Charles White.
Yeah.
And you remember that because I was starting to buy multiple copies because I saw how things were happening, right? Just to have them in my inventory. But I just think that people this is one thing that
And then even you fast forward to Amy Sherrill and her exhibition.
Yes.
Her book sold out immediately.
And Carrie James Marshall as well.
Exactly. It's just a different time, and those are the things we need to look at to give us some insight on what is really happening in the arts. The arts has diversified itself, and many of us are not aware of the changes because there's so many different dimensions to the art business. But Wondrous Works has a wonderful series of educational outlets for you. There's more online now than ever before about the arts. Just Google certain things, you can find it online.
Yeah.
Some of these books that we're talking about, the Studio's book by Dennis Forbes. Hey, Dennis Forbes. That book came out at
like $2 or $3
$75,
books, right?
$100, and that book is about $300-$400 on the secondary market.
He's done like two or three published two or three
He did one
books.
Studio's book, but he's got 4 books.
Because he did one on the prints from
Exactly.
Yeah.
He did one printmaking book and some other things. So, yeah, the book market it appreciates just like art, but in a different way.
It is an asset. So one thing that this is a teachable moment for artists and collectors alike. That may be a project that you may think about actually, starting, completing, and publishing.
You'll see more books and documentaries coming out on art in this next decade.
Are you trying to tell us something?
I've always been 10 years ahead of the information.
Okay, that's a nice way to put it. But and also for young artists or emerging artists, start really documenting your journey if you haven't done so all. Just if you're journaling or something like that, document your journey. Because you never know. I never thought that I would have to sit here and write out what my journey was in my collector space. So just if that's one of the takeaways, folks, think about,
before we allow academia to dictate what that information space looks like, it no longer carries that weight anymore. And so your voice is just as viable as anybody else's voice. That's why you'll see documentaries about Michael Jackson and see 5 different renditions of that subject. Everybody has a story from a different perspective in your artwork, and it's the same thing. But if you're not documenting your work, then you're not part of this conversation. Many artists right now are not taking advantage of modern technology. Most of them are printing G-clay prints. They don't know anything about any other printing method. Most artists now don't know anything about how to do original prints, serigraph etchings. Some of those things are becoming dying art forms, but there's some people that are about to revive the next level of that. Jamal Barber down in Atlanta, Georgia. Shout out to him. He is going to be our next Blackburn. He's going to be our next Curly Holton. If you don't know about him, check him out. He's dangerous. He's from Atlanta. There are more powerful workshops happening right now with artists that you get a chance to learn some different things. It's just an exciting time to be an artist, but at some point, you just got to get off the sidelines and participate.
Get in it.
It's time.
It is in it. So we are now in 2026. We're 40 plus years in.
Next year will be 5-0.
Really? So what is your mindset, your focus in the upcoming years?
Well, just like everything else, I believe that each artist reaches a season in their career where certain things change. For me, it's happening a little earlier than I would like, but so be it. But I'm interested in that. As I mentioned earlier, now we are wearing more hats than we used to have to wear. And so now I'm curating larger exhibitions. I have a installation at the Inner Harbor right now. It's going to run through September. That currently it's called Creatively Black Baltimore. It has about close to 500 pieces by 100 Baltimore artists, which will be soon moving to the World Trade Center and in the top of the World Gallery, probably later this fall. I curated a Harriet Tubman exhibition that was at the Eastern Shore in Camden, Maryland. That is going upstate to Cuyahoga Museum in Auburn, New York, where Harriet Tubman, her final resting place and where she decided to live. And so I'm doing projects of that nature. I'm also doing book projects, more book projects. Like I said, Paul Goodnight is the primary book that we're trying to get completed. We just ran a second edition of Karen Buster's book. And so I'm continuously trying to hone my craft as an artist, but I'm also moving into other spaces because the times are dictating that I do that.
So, little known fact is many of my tribe members know that I had the opportunity to be a part of the Elizabeth Catlett exhibition.
Exactly.
And even the book that came out with that. And some people may not know that listening to this, but that was not my first experience with loaning work to an exhibit. My first experience was actually with this brother right here at the Rotunda at Baltimore City Hall when you were, I think, doing an exhibit for, was it Black Music Month?
Yeah, I did. The mayor did a major exhibition of my musical works, my instrumental works. And so that was the first time you loaned me 2 of your pieces for that exhibition.
That was the first time,
That's
and
right.
Those pieces are still a part of my collection.
Sheila and I's life kind of goes in between and kind of goes, it kind of regulates like this. So big things are coming for Sheila Wright. I can already see it.
Yeah, we're working on some things.
That's right.
But the interesting thing is that I still have those 2 pieces, and you all will get to see images of those works in this as a part of this interview.
And you might not recognize them.
And you probably will not, and you will probably sit up there and say, "What? That's what? That's it." And so I'm just amazed at the journey, at your journey, and our journey. As family, I can always count on you to be totally authentic. Always count on you to give me sage wisdom and advice. And I don't want to come out there, but this joker, I ain't gonna say the other word I'm thinking about, but this joker, man, will call me and say it's time for you to do it. Because I feel like when he says it, it's like a spiritual thing, and I need to listen because he don't just drop stuff and I don't take it seriously. Some other people, I'm like, get out of my face with that, but not this one. And so when he says something, I'm like,
if you look at the journey, each one of those steps are connected together in some kind of way. If it's from, hey, document your work, because one day you're going to put your work in a book, to, hey, let's do the book, to, hey, one day these people are going to be retiring. They're going to need to have their stuff appraised, and I don't know but 5 appraisals, so you need to be an appraisal person. To that, to putting Elizabeth Catlett on the book, and then all of a sudden you got shows with your pieces of Elizabeth Catlett in a major museum. These things all kind of go hand in hand, but you got to start by doing the work. And I'm blessed to have had a person like Sheila working with me over the years. It's a difference when you give advice to people, and it's a difference when people listen. And so Sheila has been just as good of a student as she has been a friend.
So I'm going to say this, we're going to end this way, and I'm going to try not to cry on this. So interestingly enough, how things work sometimes is your parents pass down, right? And for me, that didn't happen. But I remember, my dad getting a little bit connected to the art space, and then he kind of did his thing, traveling South Africa and all over the place and bringing back sculptures. But Also collecting. So I will say this: one thing, my dad. One thing. Two artists that have work that spoke to my dad in a way was Kadir Nelson. Mm-hmm. And Larry Poncho Brown, and I'm gonna do a shout out to Kenneth Gatewood.
That's right.
And I didn't never think Dad was gonna sit up here and buy some original piece from Kenneth Gatewood. I thought he was gonna go for the print. He bought the original work, Kenneth. And I'm just sitting up here saying, but just some work about basically struggle. You remember that? He bought a few pieces of the struggle piece where the brothers are, chains, and it really resonated with him, and so it resonated with me. I love to see work about us.
And that's, I always tell people I do work this design with us in mind.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
And I will never run out of subjects because we are it.
Yeah. We the blank.
Exactly.
So people were like, no shit. Yes, I did. Listen, we could talk for days. We often do. But we gonna close this one out. It's a lot for us to think about in this session. We are evolving. We are growing. That will not stop no matter what the adversaries put in us. This is actually fueling us.
That's right.
We are created by our very core, and the more you come at us, the more we thrive.
That's right.
Right? So, hey, good people. I have some other announcements to make that I will make at a later date, but we want to thank you for joining us. We're going to share this. It's going to be on all the platforms. And hey, if you have some other ideas of content you would like us to share with you, to create and share with you, prayerfully by the end of the month, I will have all of those classes sewn up, and we'll be able to add some additional services to what I currently provide. We are excited about that. The other thing is that on our YouTube channel, we are very close to 1,000 subscribers that continue to support us. So hey, if you're not currently a subscriber, like, share, subscribe, and leave us some feedback about what you're thinking about what we have. We're excited, and be on the lookout for more opportunities for our showcase of artists in the Maryland, DC, and Virginia area. We're very excited. We've gotten some very extremely positive feedback and strong viewership on that, and so we're going to continue to do that to make sure that our artists know that we are excited about their career and their creativity. Thank you, and have a great one.